Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going deep on a topic that I think a lot of us want to understand better,
Yeah,
depression in men and women.
absolutely. And how it can really play out so differently.
Exactly. We're taking a deep dive into a fascinating episode of the Mind Talks podcast.
Mm,
They focus on mental health.
yeah,
And, it's such a critical issue, right? Depression, it doesn't discriminate, but how it shows up, well, that's a different story.
it is. It can be so different.
And that's what we're going to unpack.
Totally.
One of the biggest things that jumped out from the podcast was how much more likely women are to be diagnosed with depression.
Yeah, that statistic is kind of alarming, isn't it? Like, women are twice as likely to be
Yes.
diagnosed. So,
Right.
it really makes you think, like, what's going on there?
Right. Like what's happening. And the podcast really dug into that.
Uh,
And one thing they talked about was just the biological differences. Like
mhm,
women have these hormonal shifts throughout their lives.
mhm. Yeah, and that's huge. Like, think about it. Periods, pregnancy, menopause, it's constant fluctuation.
Right.
And Mind Talks actually explained, like, how those hormonal changes can mess with your brain chemistry.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like estrogen and progesterone, those hormones can really impact serotonin levels. And, serotonin is that feel-good chemical in your brain.
It is the mood regulator.
Yeah, exactly. So when those hormone levels go up and down, it can make you way more vulnerable to depression.
Makes total sense.
And it's not just those times, like even postpartum depression after childbirth, that's tied to hormones too.
Oh, wow.
And then, later in life, you've got menopause, and it's a whole other hormonal roller coaster.
Right.
It's crazy how much our biology plays a role.
And then on top of the biological stuff,
Mm-hmm.
the podcast also talked about the pressures that women face in society.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, the expectations are just different, right?
They are.
Like, think about it. Women are often expected to be, like, the primary caregiver for the kids. And then, on top of that, they're supposed to have these killer careers, be a supportive partner,
Yeah.
and keep the house running smoothly.
It's a lot.
It is. And the podcast actually used this example of a working mom,
Yeah.
trying to balance a crazy job with taking care of her kids and, often without enough support.
Yeah, that's tough.
It is. And all that pressure just builds and builds. And the podcast made it clear that chronic stress like that,
Yeah.
well, it's basically a one-way ticket to burnout and depression.
And on that note, it's kind of a tough topic.
Yeah, it is.
But the podcast did point out that there's sort of a silver lining when it comes to women and depression.
Oh.
And that's that women are actually more likely to talk about their mental health and seek help.
Right. Like they're more likely to reach out to friends, family, go to therapy, which is huge because getting that support,
It's vital.
it's essential for healing. So yeah,
Right.
that's definitely a positive.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about women, but now let's switch gears a little bit
Okay.
and talk about men.
Right, because it's a whole different ballgame.
It really is. And one thing that Mind Talks really emphasized was
Yeah.
this idea of men kind of having a silent struggle with depression.
Absolutely. It's like they're dealing with it all internally.
Yeah, like behind closed doors. And I think a lot of that comes from the societal expectations that are placed on men.
Right, exactly. Like there's this unspoken rule that men have to be tough, like strong and stoic all the time.
Band up.
Yeah, exactly. And the podcast actually had this really powerful quote.
Oh, yeah?
It said something like, society often tells men to man up and just deal with it
Hmm.
instead of, actually acknowledging their emotions and working through them.
Right, they're just supposed to push it down.
Yeah, which is so unhealthy. And that's part of why depression can look so different in men.
It manifests differently.
Exactly. Like, while women might experience sadness as a main symptom,
Yeah.
men might mask their depression with other stuff,
Like what?
like anger, irritability, or even engaging in risky behaviors.
Oh, wow. Like self-destructive stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And the podcast actually had a whole segment on that about how men might turn to like substance abuse,
Hmm.
not because they enjoy it,
Yep.
but because it's a way to numb the pain they don't feel like they can express.
Right, they're trying to escape.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that, a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah, I think it's way more common than we think.
And, on that note, the podcast also brought up a really, really sad statistic.
Yeah, the suicide rate among men.
Yeah, which is, it's heartbreaking.
It is.
And it just highlights how important it is for us to start talking more openly about men's mental health.
Absolutely. Like, we need to break down that stigma
We do.
because men deserve support too.
And thankfully, it seems like things are starting to shift a little bit.
They are, yeah. Like, the Mind Talks episode actually ended on a pretty positive note. Yeah, they highlighted how there are more and more initiatives and support groups out there specifically for men.
That's great.
Yeah, it's all about creating safe spaces for men to be vulnerable and get the help they need without judgment.
So I think it's time to sort of bring it back to our listener, right?
Okay.
Like, what can we all learn from this conversation? How can we apply these insights to make a real difference?
Well, I think it starts with awareness, right? Like understanding how depression can manifest so differently in men and women,
Hmm.
makes us more sensitive and supportive. It allows us to encourage open communication and create environments where people feel safe to express themselves.
Totally. And that goes for both women and men, right?
Absolutely.
Like, it's about sharing responsibilities at home,
Mm-hmm.
being flexible at work,
Yeah.
and just promoting this culture of empathy and understanding.
Totally. Like, imagine a world where getting help for your mental health is seen as a strength, not a weakness,
Hmm.
regardless of your gender. That's what we should be striving for.
We should. And I think the question for all of us is, how can we contribute to making that vision a reality?
Exactly. How can we, in our own little corner of the world, make a difference?
Food for thought. Thanks for joining us today, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
See you next time.